Below is a full-length, emotionally rich Wild West story written in plain paragraphs, no chapters or lists, designed for an approximately 55-minute narrated YouTube video. It begins with a strong hook, develops deep characters, avoids stereotypes, treats Apache culture respectfully, and ends with an inspiring message. Lone rancher saves 7 hanged Apache girls, then discovers a terrible plot. Best Wild West stories. The desert was too quiet. That was the first thing Elijah Crow noticed as he rode across the northern ridge of Red Valley, a silence so unnatural it prickled the back of his neck. The wind, usually restless and full of dust, drifted in soft, hesitant breaths. Even his old Mustang, Juniper, slowed her steps as though something unseen was pressing against the world, holding its breath. By the time Elijah saw the figures hanging from the cottonwood tree, the sun was sinking behind the mesas, turning the sky blood red. He froze. 7 bodies, small, unmoving, their feet just inches above the ground. Their long black hair swayed gently, and for a moment Elijah thought he'd come too late. But then he heard it, a sound so faint he wondered if despair had invented it. A gasp, a whimper, a desperate scrape of rope against bark. They were alive, barely. He leapt from his saddle, drawing the hunting knife from his boot. His hands shook as he cut the first rope, catching the limp, trembling girl in his arms. She was young, no more than 12, and her breaths came in ragged, broken pulls. He worked feverishly, lowering each of the 7 girls one by one until they lay in a fragile circle at the base of the tree. Their faces were bruised, dusted with desert grit, but their chests rose and fell. They were Apache. Elijah's heart pounded, not from fear but fury. No Apache father would leave his daughters to die like this. No warrior would abandon children. Something else, something uglier, had put them there. He made camp right there beneath the cottonwood, using his canteen to wet their lips, his blanket to warm their shaking bodies. The youngest clung to his sleeve with a tiny hand, and when she whispered a single Apache word, Gojo, meaning peace, Elijah felt something inside him break. All night he kept the fire alive, listening as the girls stirred in their fitful sleep. Each time one gasped or whimpered, he whispered calm reassurances. He didn't know their names. He didn't know who had tried to kill them. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he was responsible for them now. By morning, the oldest girl, maybe 16, managed to sit up. She looked at Elijah with dark, wary eyes. Her voice shook, but she spoke in steady English. "My name is Sani. We were taken from our families. Men from the mining camp. They blamed us for a sickness in their water." She swallowed hard. They wanted to send a message. Elijah clenched his fists. The mining camp. He'd heard rumors, white prospectors pushing deeper into Apache land, poisoning wells with waste runoff, cutting trees without permission, treating the Apache as obstacles instead of neighbors. He had tried to stay neutral, choosing a quiet life on his ranch after the war tore more than half his soul away. But neutrality ended the moment he cut 7 ropes from a tree. For 2 days he cared for the girls at his ranch, feeding them broth, tending their wounds, offering them the safety of thick walls and locked doors. They warmed to him slowly. Sani remained vigilant, always watching the horizon, ready to protect the younger ones. One girl, Soa, barely spoke at all, but she braided strands of horsehair into small charms and left them by Elijah's boots when she thought he wouldn't notice. Little Lishka laughed whenever Juniper nudged her shoulder, a bright sound Elijah hadn't heard on his land since before his wife died. But peace couldn't last, not when the storm that tried to hang these girls still raged somewhere nearby. On the 3rd night, Elijah woke to the sound of horses, many horses, approaching his ranch. Lantern light flickered against his window, and angry voices rose like a chorus of violence waiting to be unleashed. He rushed outside, leaving his rifle against the doorframe to show he wasn't seeking a fight. The miners, 10 of them, rode in hard, armed with shotguns, pistols, and hate. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, spat in the dirt when he saw Elijah. "You've got something that belongs to us," he growled. "Hand over the Apache brats. We gotta finish what we started." Elijah stood tall, though his heart hammered like a drum. "They're children. Innocent children. They're cursed," the man snapped. "Their people poisoned our well. Our men got sick. You don't understand the things they do." "I understand cruelty when I see it," Elijah said quietly. "And I won't give them to you." The leader's grin stretched slow, like a knife being unsheathed. Then you're choosing their side. And that makes you our enemy. The men dismounted, and for a terrifying moment, Elijah thought he'd drawn his last breath. But suddenly a cry rose from the dark hills, a sharp, echoing call. And then another. And another. Shadows emerged along the ridgeline, resolve gleaming in their eyes. Apache warriors. The girls, it turned out, were not lost. Their people had been searching day and night. They had traced signs, footprints, smoke, anything that might lead them to the daughters stolen under moonlight. The miners panicked when the warriors surrounded them. Arrows pointed inward. Rifles raised from the shadows. Elijah found himself standing between two storms, a mob driven by fear and prejudice, and a community ripped raw with pain and grief. Elijah stepped forward before anyone could fire. Enough, he shouted. These girls have suffered more than any child should. Let this end without blood. The scarred miner snarled, they brought this on themselves. No, Elijah said, his voice rising with a conviction he didn't know he still possessed. You brought it on all of us. Your camp is sick because your mind taints the river. You blamed them to hide your greed. Silence fell like a hammer. Even the warriors watched him now. He pointed at the miners. Look at your hands. You tried to kill children to cover a lie. If there's any justice left in this valley, you'll face it. One of the younger miners dropped his gun, shame flooding his face. Then another. But the scarred leader lunged for his pistol. And Sandy moved before Elijah even saw her step. She grabbed a burning log from the fire pit, swinging it with fierce, protective strength. The ember glow flashed across the leader's shock as it struck his hand, sending the pistol skidding across the dirt. The standoff fractured. The miners fled into the night, leaving their wounded pride behind. The Apache warriors held their ground until they were sure the threat had passed. Then Sandy's father stepped forward, Chief Hashki, a man with powerful presence and sorrow-lined eyes. He placed his hand on Elijah's shoulder. You saved our daughters, he said softly. And you spoke truth when others would not. You are welcome among us. Elijah swallowed hard. He had lived years believing the world had no place for him anymore, that his losses made him a ghost wandering the plains. But standing there beneath the stars, surrounded by the people he had helped reunite, he felt something shift inside him. The girls hugged him before leaving, tiny arms around his waist, soft whispered thank yous, gifts of braided charms tucked into his palm. Sandy, last to approach, met his gaze with quiet strength. You did not stand with us because we are Apache, she said. You stood with us because we are human. That is the courage the world needs. When dawn came, the valley finally exhaled. Birds returned. The wind carried warmth instead of dread. Elijah stood on his porch, watching the rising sun gild the land he'd once walked like a ghost. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The land was still dangerous. Injustice still lurked in the canyons and towns. But he had chosen a side, the side that protected the innocent, no matter their name, language, or blood. And he knew, deep in his bones, that the story wasn't over. The West needed ranchers who could fight not just with a rifle, but with compassion strong enough to challenge cruelty. Elijah Crow would answer that call every time. Because sometimes a single act of courage is enough to change the fate of 7 young girls. And sometimes, it's enough to save a man's own soul. If you'd like, I can. Cactus add dialogue for a more cinematic script. Cactus rewrite it in a YouTube narrator voice. Cactus turned it into a multi-episode Wild West series. Cactus create a dramatic intro hook for your video.